Welcome to today's Energy Central webcast entitled The Scott Madden Energy Industry Update, Strange Brew, Adapting to Changing Fundamentals. A few housekeeping notes we'd like to mention. For best results in viewing this presentation, we recommend using a wired high-speed internet connection, as wireless connections can be unpredictable. If you cannot get adequate sound from your computer speakers, you may dial into the audio portion using the telephone number listed in the right-hand panel of your interface under the audio section. Now, I'm happy to turn the floor over to our first speaker and our moderator, Stuart Pearman, Partner and Energy Practice Leader. Stuart, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Thank you, PJ, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you spend some time with us. Our industry experts will work to make this webinar interesting, informative, and we hope a little bit provocative for you. The webinar is adapted from our recently issued Scott Madden Energy Industry Update. Many of you are familiar with it. We issue the update about twice a year to about 10,000 industry leaders like you. One top 10 CEO said, I look forward to it. I read every word. Our aspiration for the update and for this webinar is that you find it helpful as you anticipate, react, and succeed in this complicated and, quite frankly, fascinating industry environment. So we always have a theme for updates, and the theme for this one is Strange Brew. We looked up the word strange and brew in the dictionary, and strange is not previously visited, seen, or encountered, and brew is any concoction produced by a mixture of unusual ingredients. So the industry certainly looks to us like a strange brew. For example, state regulators in New York and California are rethinking the 100-year-old rate of return cost of service paradigm. As part of grid transformation, the boundaries between producer and consumer, supply and demand, the role of the edge of the grid and the center of the grid are all getting mixed up. In technology, renewables costs are plummeting, and new models are emerging as a result. At the federal regulatory level, the EPA is about to publish, well, soon, we think maybe early October, in the Federal Register, the first ever CO2 regulation for power plants, and there's a lot more going on. So let's introduce our Scott Madden energy industry experts and get their take on what's going on. By the way, today's webcast can't cover everything in the update. We'll give you a link at the end in case you want to read the rest of it. We just don't have enough time to cover everything, so we're going to focus on major trends and the big picture in three areas: community solar, the Clean Power Plan, and New York REV versus California 769. As PJ mentioned, I'll be your moderator. I'm Stuart Pearman, Partner and Energy Practice Leader. Don Pang, Partner, will tell us about community solar. Then Todd Williams, Partner and Fossil Generation Practice Leader, will tell us about the Clean Power Plan. And last, Kristen Lyons, Partner and newly named Grid Transformation Practice Leader, will tell us about some case studies, New York versus California. Helping us in the background with Q&A will be Greg Leitra, Partner and Energy, Clean Tech, and Sustainability Research Leader. So let's get started. John, can you tell us why community solar is becoming a big deal and how it works, please?
Thank you, Stuart. As Stuart said, my name is John Pang, and I'm a partner in Scott Madden's Energy and Clean Tech practice areas. I'd like to begin the webcast by discussing community solar, a quickly growing market within the solar industry. More specifically, we'll discuss key trends around this emerging market, how it works, and then some case studies of community solar around the country. So let's begin by discussing more traditional solar models. What most people think about when we talk solar is residential rooftop solar. These are the solar panels that people or companies install on their roofs or on their home or businesses to generate electricity. The other end of the spectrum are large utility-scale solar plants that cover acres of ground and produce a much larger output of electricity. The primary benefit of residential rooftop solar is that it provides customers an alternative to grid-supplied electricity. However, we have found that many customers are attracted to residential rooftop solar not only for the financial value of offsetting their electricity usage, but because of the environmental benefits of going solar. More recently, the emergence of third-party leasing models allow customers to pursue residential rooftop solar with limited or zero capital expenditures. However, residential rooftop is still an expensive proposition, as the price per watt of electricity is approximately twice the cost of a utility system. While we have seen tremendous growth in residential rooftop solar, the total addressable market is severely limited. What I mean by that is that not everyone can install solar panels on their roof. The graph on the right-hand side of this chart shows that only a fraction of the over 100 million households in the U.S. are good candidates for solar. Many households are excluded because, firstly, they don't own the property. They live in an area that policies do not make it financially viable to do rooftop solar. They have poor credit scores preventing financing or leasing. These rooftop systems cost tens of thousands of dollars, so most people don't outright pay for them. They finance or they lease them. And if you don't have good credit scores, it's very difficult to do. Or they have a poor roof for solar installation. So, for example, some houses have big trees or buildings that shade the roof, but the roof faces the wrong way. So on the other end of the spectrum, we have utility-scale solar. These installations function more like central generation in that they're often larger, can be sited away from customer centers, and they're sited and designed for optimal performance with connections to the transmission and distribution systems. The benefit of utility-scale solar is an economy of scale that brings down installed costs, but customers lose the direct connections that renewable has. What we see emerging is a community solar model that draws upon the best elements of residential rooftop and utility-scale solar. Community solar allows customers to directly interact and engage with more cost-effective utility-scale solar systems. PJ, next slide. So, what is community solar? One key important distinction in defining the term community solar is that there is no standard industry definition. Community solar projects are often characterized by when multiple end users or subscribers purchase a portion of the capacity, the megawatts, or the output, the megawatt hours produced from a solar PV facility, and receive the benefit on their electricity bill. The solar project is typically located near the end customer or within the energy provider's jurisdiction. However, the term generally does not apply to group purchases or off-bill payments in return for an investment in the project. As for market growth, you can see from the GTM research data, it shows that there's a rapid growth of community solar. GTM forecasts that there will be 1,800 megawatts DC of community solar installed in the U.S. by 2020. This is a significant increase from the 67 megawatts that we had installed capacity at the end of 2014. A key driver for community solar is its ability to vastly increase the number of people that can participate in solar. On the last slide, we talked about that only a small portion of U.S. households can install rooftop solar. Community solar allows customers who have rooftop limitations or financial limitations to participate and receive the benefits of solar. These programs do not have the restrictions or requirements that rooftop solar has. Community solar also offers a distinct value proposition for a variety of stakeholders. Community solar allows utilities to gain experience in distributed energy resources while providing customers customer choice and a simplified solar experience. PJ, next slide. A unique aspect of community solar is that there is an unlimited number of ways to design a program, and these are based off of state policies and or specific utility objectives that drive the key program design elements. However, most programs fall into one of two categories. First, on that middle column, the upfront payment model is where customers provide upfront payment to purchase or lease panels. This model most closely represents the initial capital cost of installing and owning a rooftop solar system. However, upfront payments may look less attractive to customers compared to ongoing smaller payments. In this model, customers receive kilowatt-hour bill credits based on the actual system output and proportional to their ownership share of the system. The bill credit is at the retail rate or partial retail rate. Second, the second model is the ongoing payment model, the right-hand model. This is where a customer provides ongoing monthly payments to access capacity or output. With a capacity payment, customers receive variable output for a fixed price per kW, but with an output payment, output is guaranteed each month for a fixed price. The ongoing payment model most closely represents the third-party ownership models offered by SolarCity and others. Customers pay community solar program administrators for the output, and they receive a bill credit from the utility at the retail rate or partial retail rate. Customers often pay a premium for the solar output, but receive a hedge against future rate increases as costs are often locked in for the duration of the term. Some of the other key design elements shown in the slide include program administrator, eligible customer class, REC ownership, and program duration. In most cases, we see community solar programs being designed to meet the specific interests and needs of the sponsoring utility. PJ, next slide. So where is community solar happening? I'll just wait for the slide to catch up. There it is. So where is community solar happening? Public policy is a major driver in the growth for community solar. Currently, 24 states have at least one community solar project online, and 20 states have or are enacting supportive policies. GTM anticipates 80%, however, GTM anticipates 80% of community solar activity will occur in just 4 states: Colorado, California, Minnesota, and Massachusetts. Legislation in Colorado, California, and Minnesota have authorized community solar gardens or community solar tariffs. Specifically, in Colorado, legislation passed in 2010 allows the creation of community solar gardens of up to 2 megawatts in the service territory of the IOU. In addition, IOUs are required to purchase power from community solar gardens as part of their compliance with the state's RPS. In California, legislation passed in 2013 authorized the Green Tariff Shared Renewable Program, which allows customers to receive 50 to 100% of their consumption from solar. Statewide enrollment is capped at 600 megawatts, and several utilities are expected to offer programs to their customers in 2016. In Minnesota, legislation passed in 2013 allows subscribers to purchase or lease interest in a solar garden developed by a garden operator. The local utility must credit subscribers for generation and retail rates. Potential projects and regulations are still being reviewed by the utility and regulators. The model in Massachusetts is somewhat different. Here, net metering policies allow participating net metered systems to allocate access generation to one or more customers within a distribution company's service area. This model may be referred to as virtual net metering, since the customer does not need to have the solar system near their property or connected to their property. Next slide, PJ. So, some case studies. In partnership with SEPA, the Solar Electric Power Association, we've examined community solar case studies from around the country. As I mentioned earlier, one of the striking features of community solar is the diversity in program designs. However, the other thing that becomes evident in this research is that in almost all cases, customers participating in community solar programs are willing to pay a premium over their current retail electricity rate. Through our research, we know that this customer participation is often driven by an interest in renewable technologies or environmental attributes of the technologies. While customers often pay more when they sign up, it is anticipated that they may experience financial benefits over the long term. Most community solar prices are locked in for a long duration, for example, 20 years, which provides the customers a hedge against rising electricity prices. For example, you can see that the OUC community solar customers pay a 2.5-cent premium above retail rates in their monthly bills, but the rate of 13 cents per kilowatt hour is locked in for 25 years. Similarly, at TEP, customers pay a 2-cent premium in their monthly bills over retail rates. TRICO's program differs in that customers make an upfront lease payment, which is estimated to produce a financial payback in 15 years. We recently surveyed customers for a mid-sized utility considering implementing community solar, and we found that the most attractive features were that community solar supports clean energy, reduces dependence on fossil fuels, and allows customers to support solar without requiring solar to be located on their property. PJ, next slide. I'd like to close this section on community solar by sharing some of the implementation issues that must be addressed in order to develop a successful community solar program. In terms of program design, a thorough understanding of what policy drivers exist to support or hinder community solar is important. Who should the program administrator be? What are the impact and implications of securities regulations? As many utilities are facing this right now, to see that the community solar program does not cross SEC regulations. Who owns the rights to renewable energy certificates? And where must community solar facilities be located relative to participating customers? Regarding the customers, utilities need to understand what motivates their customers. What are customers willing to pay in terms of administrative fees and premiums over regular retail rates? And are customers willing to make long-term commitments to the project? And finally, how much consumption will customers be interested in offset? Finally, the financial implications of community solar. How cost competitive is solar PV in your region? What are the long-term cost trends for solar PV? How does community solar impact the rooftop solar market? How does the rate structure support or hinder adoption? To briefly recap, Scott Madden sees significant growth potential for community solar. However, our experience with clients indicates detailed analysis of customer sentiments and market dynamics can greatly increase the effectiveness and probability of success of a community solar program. That concludes my comments, and I look forward to questions at the end of the presentation. Stuart?
Thank you, John. Todd, can you please tell us what is in the final Clean Power Plan? For those of us who don't want to read each one of the 1,500 pages, give us the Cliff Notes, and how does it differ from the proposed rule? And given all this content, can you kind of give us some perspective on this, please?
Sure. Thanks, Stuart. My objective this afternoon really is to provide information and insights on the Clean Power Plan. And we have limited time to discuss what Stuart called a 1,500-plus page rule. It's a massive rule, so I'm really just going to hit the highlights. The draft of the Clean Power Plan was issued in June 2014. The final rule was released on August 3rd of 2015 after receiving a record 4.3 million public comments. The rule governs performance standards for greenhouse gas emissions for existing power generation sources. The EPA claims authority for the proposed rule under the 1970 Clean Air Act under sections 111B and 111D. Now, which section of the rule is based on is important in the legal realms, as section 111D of the Clean Air Act is commonly referred to as the legislative glitch. Back in the 70s, two versions were enacted, one from the House and one from the Senate, both of which aim to prevent the EPA from issuing duplicative regulations. The House language bars the EPA from using Section 111D to regulate an emission source that is already subject to Section 112 rules. Power plants are in fact already regulated under Section 112, so this interpretation would kill the plan right out of the gate. The Senate version prohibits the agency from writing a second rule that would control the same pollutant that is already regulated. The EPA has actually not regulated greenhouse gases previously, and the agency argues that it deserves deference from the courts in choosing the Senate version of the amendment, and of course expect legal challenges underway. The EPA says the plan will reduce carbon pollution from power plants, the nation's largest source of greenhouse gases, while maintaining energy reliability and affordability. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is spearheading the Just Say No campaign to encourage states to refuse to comply. According to the EPA, the U.S. will see net benefits of $26 to $45 billion, including climate and health benefits. Public health benefits, they've quantified on a per-year basis, they expect to avoid 3,600 premature deaths, 1,700 heart attacks, 90,000 asthma attacks, and around 300,000 missed work or school days. Now, on the other side, many of the issues raised against the Clean Power Plan focus on cost, and other issues include focus on state rights versus the federal government. But much of the analysis conducted to date is based on the proposed rule, which is different but should be comparable with the new rule. The EPA analysis found that the American families are likely to save $85 to $100 per year on their power bills. This is debated by detractors who claim that the rule will cost America from over $350 billion to just under $1 trillion, depending on the source, and drive electricity prices higher. Higher prices, in turn, will harm minority and low-income communities. And then coal country states such as Kentucky, Wyoming, West Virginia may be doubly impacted because they rely on the coal for electricity and their economies rely on mining it. PJ, can we go to the next slide? So there's a number of changes between the draft and the final rule. The final rule begins in 2022 versus the original target of 2020, a 2-year extension to address reliability concerns. The final rule has a step-down glide path versus the original cliff in reductions. And then the final rule also dropped one of the proposed building blocks for target setting, the end-use energy efficiency, leaving 3 building blocks shown on this slide. As a side note, energy efficiency can still be used by states to meet compliance. Other key changes include the addition of a safety valve to ensure grid reliability. CO2 targets were originally projected at 30% reduction from 2005 level. Now they're 32%. And just FYI, the Clean Power Plan was developed against 2012 data, and the reason we talked about 2005 because that's the point of comparison that the United States has been using for international climate pledges as they talk internationally. Other changes include heat rate improvement for fossil generation was reduced based on public comment, and renewables estimated portion of generation went from 22% to 28%. And then there's other changes, and we've detailed those in the EIU, which Stuart mentioned, but I'm not going to cover them for the sake of time here. If we can go to the next slide. So in terms of deadlines, the Clean Power Plan is expected to be added to the Federal Register in October, as Stuart mentioned earlier in the call. Final complete state plans are due September 2016. Pundits argue that this deadline will smoke out the Just Say No states as there's a show your work requirement. A 2-year extension appears to be automatic, making final plans due no later than September 6, 2018. The final rule provides 15 years for full implementation of all emission reduction measures, with incremental steps for planning and demonstration that will ensure progress is being made in achieving the CO2 emission reductions. During the interim period, states are required to periodically compare emission levels achieved by their effective power plans with emission levels projected in the state plan and report those results to the EPA. Let's go with the next slide. So target setting. How did the EPA actually set the targets for each state? Well, first the EPA started by tallying up all the coal, oil, and natural gas power plants across the United States. They placed them into 2 broad categories and then figured out the average emission rates in 2012 in each of the country's 3 main electric grids. Second, the EPA estimated how much CO2 these power plants can reasonably cut using the best system of emission reductions, or BSER, B-S-E-R. And that is, the EPA had to show that power plants can cut emissions using methods that have been adequately demonstrated and can be done at a reasonable cost. What the EPA decided is that utilities could reduce emissions from their coal and natural gas power plants using 3 different methodologies. These methods are known as the building blocks in the rule. Now, these 3 building blocks that we talked about earlier are not what states actually have to do to cut emissions. These building blocks are only there so the EPA can calculate what a reasonable reduction from fossil power plants looks like. States can pick their own preferred route to cutting emissions. Third, the EPA calculated what would happen if these 3 building blocks were applied to each interconnection in terms of improved efficiency, gas displacements of coal, and renewable displacements of gas and coal. The EPA then used the Eastern Interconnection as the nationwide model because these power plant targets were the least stringent of all 3 of the regions in the country. Fourth, the EPA applied the new power plant targets to individual states depending on each state's current power mix. Every state has a different interim goal and final goal. The EPA applied its formula to 47 of the states and derived a different emission target for each one. Vermont and Washington, D.C. are exempt because they don't have any large fossil fuel or electric power plants, so there's nothing to cut. Alaska and Hawaii did not receive specific targets because the EPA is still trying to figure out how to deal with their unique grid situations. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about what has to be reduced. If we look at pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, the bar chart represents the interim rates in dark gray and the final rates in blue for fossil steam units on the left and combustion turbines on the right. The colored lines running across the graph represent current emission levels by technology. So, for example, a supercritical coal unit emits just over 1,700 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, whereas a natural gas combined cycle emits 786 pounds. The light gray background represents the range of state targets. Supercritical coal would need to reduce 400 or more pounds of CO2, or over 23% to achieve future goals. Natural gas combustion turbines would need to reduce almost 340 pounds of CO2 per megawatt, just around 30%. As the note says on the slide, existing technologies well exceed targeted levels, so states will likely have to employ other measures to comply, measures such as implementing renewable energy efficiency or trading. Let's go to the next slide. So EPA refers to programs limiting the state's total power sector CO2 emissions as either mass-based, is either mass-based, while those limiting each point source CO2 emissions per megawatt hour is rate-based. So depending on the state implementation plan, a facility or utility could offset emissions by purchasing pollution allowances or emission rate credits, or also called ERCs, to make up for the difference. States get to choose between using mass or rate-based targets. The EPA tried to make sure that the rate and mass-based goals were roughly equivalent, but there are pros and cons to adopting one or the other. If a state adopts a rate-based goal, then emissions can technically increase over time with economic growth. It's just that the carbon intensity of the power plants has to go down. By contrast, and as shown in the illustration on this slide, the EPA estimates that the mass-based goals might be a little simpler to comply with, as well as more useful for setting up cap-and-trade programs. They would be less costly, promote trading because there's a ready path forward, for example, under the trading initiative set up for the RGGI, or Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And additionally, it offers more flexibility. States can leverage efficiency investments under mass-based plans. Let's go with the next slide. So the final Clean Power Plan provides guidelines for the development, submission, and implementation of state plans in order to implement the interim and final CO2 emission performance rates. The EPA asserts that states can tailor their plans to meet their respective energy, environmental, and economic needs and goals, and those are the local communities by a number of ways, including relying on a diverse set of energy resources, protecting electric system reliability, providing affordable electricity, and recognizing investments that states and power companies are already making. If the EPA deems a state plan unsatisfactory, that state will then be defaulted into the federal implementation plan and be assigned either a mass or rate-based goal. Let's go to the next slide. So to wrap up, as the nuances and implications of this rule set in, the Clean Power Plan has the potential to dramatically change the energy landscape by pulling states into a de facto national cap-and-trade system. We believe that they will be inevitable legislation. The Clean Power Plan will be challenged using the Clean Air Act, Section 111D, which was intended to establish performance standards under the best system of emissions reductions, as improperly extending the term system beyond a specific resource. Opponents have raised a number of issues. First, the EPA cannot regulate outside the fence line of the power plant. Second, the building blocks are unreasonable because they look outside the fence line. Third, power plants are regulated under Section 112 already, which is the Hazardous Air Pollution Program, making the rule duplicative. And fourth, the EPA is not the energy regulator with jurisdiction over energy policies. This is an incursion on state rights. Next, we see possible nuclear benefits to the Clean Power Plant. New nuclear, including uprates, will benefit as compliance vehicles. While existing nuclear plants are not counted towards compliance, their dispatchability and low carbon footprint may encourage relicensing under a mass-based plan, especially if the replacement alternative is non-renewables. Next, there's some complex interactions with other environmental regulations that need to be worked out. The recent remand of the Cross-State Air Pollution Rule, or CSAPR, for reconsideration of cost effectiveness and emissions budgets at a minimum creates some uncertainty and complexity in how states and generators manage CSAPR and the CPP together. Next, there's reliability implications. While the EPA has added some flexibility in planning requirements to account for potential reliability issues, the North American Electric Reliability Council, or NERC's, assessment of reliability implications is expected in the second quarter of 2016, and time will tell whether the EPA and the courts will, in fact, allow exemptions for reliability critical generators. Finally, let's not forget about new source rules as well. Sometimes overlooked are new source performance standards, also issued in tandem with the Clean Power Plan. In fact, emission rate standards for existing sources, both fossil steam and natural gas combined cycle, are more stringent than for new and reconstructed sources. With that, I'm going to say thank you for your time and turn it back over to Stuart.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate that. Kristen, grid transformation is the leading edge for our industry. Can you tell us a little bit about the reimagining of the industry in New York and in California? What's the same and what's different?
Sure. Thank you, Stu. In thinking about the integration of distributed energy resources, we wanted to provide an overview of the two jurisdictions that, in our view, are providing, frankly, the leading edge on these questions. And I've heard a number of people say that California and New York are doing roughly the same thing, that their approaches are very similar. And what I'd like you to come away with today is an understanding that they are doing some similar things with similar goals, but they're also doing some things that are very different. And the scope of the relative proceedings is very different. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk primarily about California Section 769, which required that the California utilities provide distribution resource plans, DRPs, that discuss the integration of distributed energy resources into the grid. And I'm going to compare that with the New York Rev set of proceedings. So if we start at the highest level and look at the goals of each proceeding, so in California, we're interested in increasing the deployment of DER in support of environmental goals. We're interested in modernizing the electric distribution system to accommodate two-way flows of energy. We want to enable customer choice of new technology and animate opportunities for DER to realize benefits for the provision of grid services. So it's very focused on DER, and importantly, it doesn't get into some of the broader reforms that we see in REV yet. In New York, we're hearing about enhancing customer knowledge and tools to support effective management of the total energy bill, so a focus on the customer and giving some more choice and information. New York is also focusing on the animation of markets and leveraging ratepayer contributions, and this is one of the places where the two sets of proceedings begin to diverge, and I'll come back to that in a moment. New York has focused on system-wide efficiency. It's a peaky system, and they want to increase the utilization of T&D assets. So efficiency has become important there. They're promoting fuel and resource diversity, which begins to speak to the environmental goals. They will also enhance sustainability and resiliency. Again, back to the modernization of the grid, and they want to reduce carbon emissions. So on the face of it, these two sets of proceedings have a lot in common in terms of what they're hoping to accomplish. Importantly, and going back to the comment about animating markets in New York is moving toward a distribution level market. And I'm going to talk more about that as we go forward, but this is a primary difference in the approaches that the two regulators have taken to date. So next slide, please. So starting with California, as we look at what was asked for in the distribution resource plan, they were very specific in the ask, and the utilities filed these plans in July of this year. They wanted some very specific analyses, including integrated capacity analysis of the grid, a locational net benefits methodology, which is a mechanism for evaluating these resources and their impact in different locations, and implications of DER growth scenarios. They asked for demonstration and deployment projects to illustrate the analyses that they asked for. So they were specific, and the Commission has been specific in what types of demonstration or pilot projects they want to see. They focused on the implications of bidirectional data sharing, so data sharing by the utility with customers and DER providers, and the sharing of those DER resources back to the utility. They also wanted to hear about safety on the grid, because these resources operate differently in certain parts of the grid than traditional infrastructure, so there are safety considerations. They wanted to hear about barriers to entry for DER deployment. And importantly, they focused on utility investments to modernize the grid to accommodate these resources. And this is an area that California has provided significantly more focus on to date than New York has. So this is all what California 679 proceeding asked for. Importantly, they also asked, and moving on to the next slide, please, what other contracts and tariffs will be impacted by the DRP request. So rather than pursue the DRPs in a vacuum, California said, let us know what else is going to be impacted, and utilities were required to provide that list in the filing. So at a high level, they provided what they believe the impacts would be to things such as electric and gas rules, i.e. what constitutes utility service, how resources are interconnected, gas line extensions for CHP, which may seem like one step further than the DRP went, but we're talking about the full set of DER resources that may come on the grid. They have implications for the access to customer data, because that's going to look different with the DRP. These rules impact self-generation and the degree to which a customer may self-generate, and they also impact the tariffs, net metering, feed-in tariffs, and time of use rates. So all of these items have been considered as part of this DRP filing. Importantly, California, in a separate proceeding, has made the decision to go to residential rate design reform. So in July, they released a proceeding that went to default time of use rates and provided 2 tiers of customer rates instead of 4, which has had significant implications for the possible proliferation of rooftop solar, given that rooftop solar was being at least partially driven by the higher rate tiers in California. So again, they're looking at all of these items, but they've not taken the more broad-reaching approach that New York has on some of these same items. The next slide, moving on, please. But it's important to recognize that they haven't disregarded the market view either. So what the California ISO has done is recently they approved the proposal for the aggregation of distributed energy resources by a third party. So as these individual DERs cannot bid into the market themselves, it's possible for a third party now to aggregate these resources and bid them in and then provide compensation. So the requirement for providing settlement quality data, metering, and telemetry falls to this third party that then reimburses the DER owners. And under this provision, Southern California Edison just recently bid in over 1,100 megawatts to the California ISL. So it's not that California is not taking advantage of market mechanisms as they support the proliferation of DER. They're doing it in a different way than New York is. Speaking of which, let's move on to New York. Next slide, please. So when we talk about what New York is asking for, and candidly, we could spend days and days going through the various pieces, but I'm going to focus specifically on tracks 1 and 2. Track 1 was issued as a straw proposal last year in 2014 and was made an order in February of this year. And I want to provide some highlights. First, Track 1 established the distribution system platform provider as the utility, which means that the utility will be responsible for planning, operating, and maintaining the grid and for the implementation of the distribution level market as it evolves. It will also be responsible for implementing the analysis of alternative resources to alleviate or defer the need for traditional utility CapEx. So the market is showing up there in two interesting ways. The potential use of alternative resources to defer CapEx, as well as the distribution level market that I mentioned. Their demonstration projects were also part of the Track 1 order, and these have focused on proving out the concepts that have been put forward as part of REV. So we're looking at potential alternative revenue streams for the utility, and that appears again in Track 2. We're talking about testing out potentially different rate designs and seeing how market construct may play out. So while California focused very specifically on things that were requested as part of the DRP, the ask for demonstration projects in New York has been different and broader. This order does require the utilities to file a distributed system implementation plan, or a DSIP. The guidance for those is scheduled to come out in October, and they will be filed next June. And these are the moral equivalent of the DRPs in California. This is the plan that puts it all together and describes how the utilities are going to go forward with changed forecasting, transmission and distribution planning, the implementation of improved interconnection processes. And again, we're waiting for the guidance, but this is the roadmap for how all that gets done. So that is really the equivalent of what California asked for in the DRPs. They also asked for a benefit cost analysis framework, which will be provided as a handbook to accompany the DSIP, and it's what each utility will use to provide a level playing field with which to evaluate traditional infrastructure, CapEx, versus non-traditional or DER infrastructure. So it's a way to assess system needs and identify places where alternative resources could be valuable in deferring or alleviating the need for traditional CapEx. So with that, I certainly haven't covered the waterfront on track one, but that gives you a flavor of the kinds of things that are coming. Could we move to the next slide, please? So track 2 is titled Ratemaking and Business Model Reform. So they have said out loud that business model reform is on the table in New York. And in California, with the issuance of the DRP guidance, they actually said specifically that it wasn't, which is an important difference again. So track 2, and again, people are spending days working through the elements of track 2. Track 2 has been issued as a white paper. Utilities in New York are developing comments now, and the final order is expected to be issued in 2016. Some of the things that have been proposed give you an idea of where the Commission is headed. So first, market-based earnings. Market-based earnings are opportunities for utilities to earn revenue outside of the traditional rate-making construct, i.e. other revenue streams from distributed system platform transaction fees, from advertising, from co-branding on portals, from potential data analytics that they may provide on behalf of their customers, or for providing engineering services for different interconnections to the grid. So it's alternative revenue streams for the utility, and these are the ones that have been so far proposed as part of Track 2. The scorecard mechanisms are metrics that the staff has said may be tracked as part of the implementation of REV. So they've identified things that have been put out as of primary importance so far in the REV proceeding. I mentioned system utilization before. They're interested in tracking DG, energy efficiency, dynamic load management, time of use rates, the efficacy and opt-in rate for those, the development of the market. So they want a metric to track the degree to which the DSP market that I mentioned is moving forward. They want to track the degree to which the market-based earnings revenue streams are moving forward. So that provides a flavor of the kinds of things that the scorecard may be tracking going forward. The earnings impact mechanisms are important because these are where the utility may earn or have their ROEs reduced based on their performance here. So some of these are positive only, and some of these are symmetrical. So they're looking at a total peak reduction. In New York, they're looking at a total peak reduction of 14%. Energy efficiency would make up 10% of that total. They're looking at affordability. They're looking at customer engagement and information access, and then the interconnection process, so facilitating the interconnection of customers interested in implementing DER. So these are a view into the possible future of what may start to show up in rate cases. Importantly, the ability to earn on some of these earnings impact mechanisms may well be tied to the degree to which we see a reduction in the customer bill. So there is an assumption underpinning REV that there should be a reduction in the customer bill, and to the degree that that is not achieved, we may see these metrics or these mechanisms move in the opposite direction. They could go from positive to symmetric if the Commission doesn't see the kind of movement that they're interested in. Lastly, and again, I hate to give rate design and DER compensation short shrift, but there are a number of areas where the Commission is asking for utilities to look at rate design, and I'll give you a few. So they're looking at the demand charge for possible study. They're looking at the facilitation of time of use rates, a possible smart home rate, improving the commercial and industrial rate design, and providing additional solutions for low income. Last but not least, the Commission has specifically called out that they want to hear from utilities about the value of the question. So there's significant work going on to look at what is the value of D and how is that calculated into the value of resources that appear on the grid and ultimately could lead to how they are compensated, dispatched on the distribution grid. Certainly more to come on that question. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, this provides an overview of the similarities and differences. Clearly, there's a different approach across the two sets of proceedings as it pertains to market development and design, and I think we're going to see them continue to evolve differently. Cost-benefit analysis, they're certainly looking at some of the same things, but New York has added the element of value of D and possible compensation on that side to the discussion as well. Rate reform has been stated as a portion of REV, while in California they're treating that separately. And then I'll leave you to read the rest of the items there. Hopefully this has at least provided you an overview of the two sets of proceedings and a place to look if you want more information. Back to you, Stu.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, let's try to field some questions now. First of all, thanks for all your questions. We've been following as they came in, and here's where we want to start is with a question for Kristen. Kristen, what do you think distinguishes REV from the other proceedings in the U.S.? There's a lot going on that's focused on modernization of the grid or integrating distributed resources, but what's different about the New York proceeding?
Well, first, I think REV is further reaching than any of the other proceedings. They've included everything from interconnection to increased DER penetration to demo projects to rate reform, all under one set of proceedings that are ideally meant to move forward holistically. So it's the most holistic view that we've seen there. Whether it proves successful in achieving all of its goals remains to be seen. The other place that I think differs from some of the other proceedings going on in the U.S. is that the degree to which stakeholders and external parties have been given a seat at the table is unique. In some cases, external parties have been asked to hold the pen in some of the working groups, so that they've had a tremendous amount of say and influence in these proceedings right next to the utilities, which I think is an important difference that REV has pointed out as opposed to some of the other jurisdictions.
I can remember when air industry was not the center of attention and everything we did was not a 9-day wonder in the village, and it sounds like it is the opposite of that in New York. Kristen, why do you say that California isn't fundamentally changing the utility business model while New York is?
Well, again, I think California is certainly acting progressively, but in terms of even the way the guidance was provided as part of the DRP proceeding, they said specifically we're not changing utility services business model here. What we want is further integration of DER. And I do think that we're going to see changes as we begin to look at a more integrated approach for compensating these alternative resources, and that if to the degree that they are built in to part of the infrastructure development of the grid. But for today, the California Commission is not asking utilities to look at some of the things that we're seeing in Track 2 in New York.
Thank you, Kristen. Here's a question for John Pang. What are the benefits of community solar for utilities? Why should they be interested in community solar?
That's a great question, Stuart. For a utility that's not connected or developed a solar project already, community solar is an excellent opportunity to gain operational experience with solar. Program like community solar allows the utility to really see something different and see the intermittent nature of solar and how that can be matched with their peak load. Those utilities with existing solar operational experience, community solar really offers them to give another service offering to their customer. We have found that there is a distinct customer segment that is interested in pursuing community solar. And community solar allows these customers to pursue this and have solar without the hassle of maintaining a system on their own home, and if they could do that at all anyway. And it allows customers to have an additional choice there. Sure.
One more for you, John. If you were a utility thinking about exploring a community solar project, what would you recommend to me?
What we would recommend, Stuart, is that all the utilities are in different geographic territories and jurisdictions. And we would recommend convening stakeholder focus groups and conducting customer surveys to be more informed about what your customers want. We think that we've seen differences across the country, and this information will allow the utility to gauge customer interest in community solar, but really allow the utility to design the program with the key design elements such as pricing and time commitments that really meet the needs of their customers.
Thank you, John. Todd, a couple of questions for you. First, here's one that came in. It says, other than heat rate improvement and fuel switching to gas, what are the other CO2 control technologies that are being considered, meaning stuff that you would add to existing coal plants?
Well, good question. For existing plants, there's really no reasonable, viable CO2 specific technologies that are going to meet the anticipated goals, at least options that are currently cost effective. of course, target setting is different than compliance. So that's why I said those targets on the bar graph slide imply other measures like energy efficiency and renewables may be needed, along with mix change from coal towards gas. For new plants, carbon capture and sequestration has been designated, but at a lower rate than in the proposed rules. So the EPA picked a site for demonstration that uses less carbon capture and sequestration and was not federally funded, which will make this more legally defensible from their proposal. So, Stuart?
Thank you. Todd, one last question for you, and then we'll wrap up and turn it over to PJ and try and finish on time for everybody. Who are the winners and losers under the Clean Power Plan?
So renewables are the obvious winners, as are new nuclear generation sources, energy efficiency, and natural gas. So these sources are all going to be called on to generate more power in the future to replace displaced fossil sources. Additionally, there are certain states that come out better than others under the Clean Power Plan, specifically the states that have already cut back on coal and oil generation sources. Let me pull an example. So California's CO2 rate in 2020 is projected by the EPA without the Clean Power Plan to be 712 pounds per megawatt hour. Under the Clean Power Plan, California's 2030 goal is set at 828 pounds per megawatt hour. So their goal is higher than their projection. Other states that see a similar advantage include Oregon, Idaho, Washington, Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, New York, and Delaware. Sorry, big list. These states and others that can meet their goal they'll end up with a surplus of possible credits, which then can be monetized through trading. Stuart?
Thank you, Todd. Let's wrap up. Just want to say thank you very much to everyone for joining us. We'd encourage you to hit the link at the bottom of this page and view or download the entire energy industry update. It is indeed a strange brew. It's sort of, we're on both sides of the bar, the people on this call. We are partaking of this beverage. On the other hand, as industry leaders, we're also the mixologists mixing it up. It'll be fun to watch this stuff evolve. PJ, thanks so much for setting up this webinar for all of us, and let me turn it over back to you.
You got it, and thank you, speakers. Fantastic presentations. For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed today's discussion. As you log off, please take a moment to complete our survey and give us your feedback so we can continue to provide you with quality content. Thank you for attending, and this does conclude today's presentation.